Have you ever been pulled into a documentary about an obscure subject that you weren't really interested in at the time?
Does the question, why do animated characters wear gloves, come up a lot for you?
But then you find yourself an hour and a half later wondering where all the time went? Are you also wondering why your documentary isn't having this same effect on your audience? Well, today I want to give you some tips on how you can revive your story that might be falling a little flat and create a film that your audience cannot walk away from. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that documentaries are about sharing information with your audience. I mean, no one knows more about painting than that character you're shooting with, and combined with your beautiful B-roll of them in action, your audience is guaranteed to be as stoked as you are. This is only part of the puzzle. The reason why we actually watch documentaries is not to receive more information about our world. If I wanted to know more about painting, I could go on YouTube, watch tutorials, I could go on Reddit and scroll through niche subreddits till my heart's content. With the access to the internet and information that we have these days, if we want to know facts about something, it's only a couple clicks and a couple searches away. So given this, why do we still watch documentaries? Well, us humans, we love documentaries not because of the factual information, but because we get to experience the world through someone else's eyes. Oftentimes, characters have questions about their world that they're trying to find answers to. These questions in turn cause us to ask questions ourselves. It's almost as if the characters are reaching through the screen and saying, "Hey, what do you think of this? What's your opinion on this? How does this point of view fit into your view of the world? Or how does it differ?" These questions and unique conclusions that these characters are drawing about their world are what turn us, the audience, from passive watchers to active participants in the story. When you go beyond the factual information and you get into that realm of subjectivity and people's unique views of the world, these aren't questions that you can easily answer through a Google search. So when our characters raise these questions, we can't help but want to follow along and find the answers as they find them for themselves. This is what ultimately hooks your audience and gets them to keep watching till the end of your film. So how do we take a boring film that's just packed full of factual information and transform it into something that's compelling enough to keep an audience to stick around? Arguably, one of the most prolific documentary storytellers of the modern day is Ira Glass, the creator of the award-winning podcast, This American Life. Ira Glass has a great quote on how the writers and journalists at This American Life tackle this problem of telling stories that might get bogged down with boring factual information. I usually think of a story as having two basic parts. There's the plot, where someone goes through some experience, and then there are moments of reflection, where this person says something interesting about what's happened. Or put another way, there's the action of the story, and there are the conclusions. So one way to get an alien story to work, and to determine if it's even a story at all, is to figure out what surprising conclusions about the world might come from that story. In other words, if you want to keep your audience interested, if you want to keep pulling them along through your story, you need to not only be offering up new information, but you also need to add some reflection from your characters, some novel conclusions about that new information. Humans are naturally judgy people, and so when someone offers up an opinion that we agree with, we feel like they're in our tribe. We feel like we buy into that character and agree with them and want to hear more from them because they're immediately likable. However, on the flip side, when someone offers an opinion that challenges how we see the world, we naturally judge them and want to poke holes in their opinions to basically prove that our way of seeing the world is correct. As a filmmaker, either one of these reactions is what we're going for because it forces the audience to actually be involved in the story. It forces them to want to draw their own conclusions. And when there's all these unanswered questions about the world and we see these characters behaving in ways we do or don't agree with, We just want to find out more information. A perfect example of this is if you've ever scrolled through a comment section, which you just wildly disagree with, you can't help but keep scrolling through, and you'll find yourself a half hour later just getting enraged, but you're still just reading more and more thoughts and comments from people that you just don't agree with, because you want to poke holes and prove that your view of the world is correct. So what does this all mean when it comes back to actually editing our documentary and shaping our story in the edit? Well, the way I like to think of all of this when it comes to editing my own documentaries is that there's two types of information that you get from an interview with a character. There's exposition and emotion. Exposition sets the scene. It gives us the information to understand the plot of the film. It tells us what events are occurring, when and where they're all happening. It's not factual information, it's totally subjective. It's not right or wrong, it's just the experience of the character during the events unfolding. Here's an example of how I've used this in my documentary, Mountain Turks. At the beginning of the film, the main character, Eric, tells us some context about his parents and their careers as geologists.
When I was about 5, they both started going down to the Antarctic. So one summer, one would go down for 3 months, and then the next summer, another one would go down. My mother was the second woman to receive the Polar Medal. She was the first woman ever to lead a deep field party.
These interview quotes are exposition. They give us factual information about Eric's parents and Eric's early childhood. But then afterwards, this happens.
She's held up, and quite rightly so, as being a trailblazer and a sort of a role model for women pushing the boundaries and getting out there. So I sort of grew up thinking that's what parents did. It was normal to try and push boundaries, to try new things.
Both of us and Eric just love exploring, just going places for the sake of seeing them.
Eric especially has just taken it into another dimension and done his own thing and done some really exciting trips.
This is the emotion or the conclusion that Eric has drawn about his early childhood with having parents that were always off on wild expeditions. Rather than just knowing facts about Eric's life, we now have some insight into how his brain works, how he sees the world, what makes him tick. He grew up with parents who were constantly in the mountains. They were in the Antarctic, always pushing their limits mentally and physically. So he feels like it's normal for everyone to want to do the same. This teases the audience. It signals to them that this guy, Eric, is always trying to do some new crazy stuff, and that if you stick around, you're probably going to witness him pushing his own boundaries in some kind of cool way. It makes it into a story that you are compelled to stick around for. You start caring about the characters. You feel personally invested in the story. So to sum this all up, there's two main ingredients to a compelling story. There's information and conclusions, or as I like to think of it, exposition and emotion. If your audience is leaving halfway through your film, odds are you're leaning too much towards the exposition side and you're not injecting enough emotion from your characters. To fix this, I suggest going back through your interviews and looking for moments where your characters aren't talking about facts and figures, but they're actually talking about how they feel about that information. Look for signs where they're reflecting on events that happened, or any time that they're offering up something that's subjective. It's an opinion and not actually a fact. Flipping between adding information and adding emotion will give your audience a little bit of a dangling carrot, and they'll constantly be wanting to update their perception of this character and find out more about them. Anyways, that's it for today. I hope that helped. Ironically, all of the thoughts in this video are actually my subjective point of view, my opinions on the craft of storytelling. But I assume if you stuck around for this long, then you too have some burning unanswered questions about the craft of documentary and storytelling. And so if you have any other questions, feel free to leave a comment. I'd love to try and answer them. If you enjoy this type of content, if if you want to learn more about documentary storytelling, I'd love for you to subscribe and stick around. Lastly, I have a Patreon right now. It's totally free to join. If you do join, there's a free resource there with a documentary folder structure template, as well as a documentary project structure for DaVinci Resolve that you can download totally for free. And I'll be slowly building that in the future with more perks. Yeah, that's it for me, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Later.